You went to church to worship and you came home to feast. So Mother would have been quite, and of course Father worked very hard at the foundry. So after dinner they liked to nap. Sent the children off to Sunday school. Of course the evening service was the main one in those days, and I used to go with my mother to the evening service. Well, I went on the morning as well. I went 4 times a Sunday.
How old were you when you were doing that?
Well, I went first when I was 4, 3 or 4, to the infants department of the Sunday school.
And you carried on going 4 times
carried on
a Sunday right the way through?
Right through. And of course I stayed in church because I played. The organist was called up to the Navy. I was about 12 then. And that was about the age that they started thinking about leaving the church. And my brother Gerald did, you see, and my brother Kenneth.
But you were chained to
because the organist was called up into the Navy, and they wanted somebody to play the organ in the morning, which was not the main service. Not many came in the morning. And so I was put on the organ because I'd learned to play the piano. My feet would hardly reach the pedals. You've got me talking now, but I know when I played the hymn, I used to play the verse, and at the end of the verse, I couldn't really play the pedals, but at the end of each verse, I would find what was the final pedal. And when I came to the end of the Jesus loves me, this I know, for the Bible tells me so, little ones to him belong, they are weak, but he is strong.
Just make sure you got that final note.
One. But then, of course, later I was even able to play the pedals. That kept me in the church, really, because I wasn't really converted. I was a nominal chapel goer. I was converted in the Royal Air Force when I was 19, in the middle of the night, on night shift. I've told you this.
Oh, no, tell me.
Oh, well, I was on radar, you see, and the radar mechanics had to keep the transmitters. They were running day and night because they used to give a signal to the planes to help them to fix their location in those days. It was much more sophisticated now. That was the beginning of television, really, radar. Well, one night I was on duty, night duty, because the transmitter had to be kept going all through the night. And occasionally they would trip. I mean, something would happen and they'd shut down. And then, of course, quickly you'd have to put them on the air again. And I was at West Crawl, which is down near Kingsbridge, here in South Devon. And was usually 2 on watch. And this other fellow said, "You can manage on your own, can't you?" I said, "I want to see my girlfriend." Oh, I said, "Yes, all right. Be all right." So I was on my own, on night shift, in the radar station with these transmitters. And they're noisy because there were great big valves in them then, which had to be kept cool. And so there were these blowers, quite noisy. And I'd been in trouble for some time because I couldn't really go as far as many of my friends in the Royal Air Force did. When you're away from home, you give up your restraints. I could feel that I was slipping. And that night, I took my New Testament with me, just for something to read in the middle of the night. So it was about 1 o'clock in the morning. I was reading Mark's Gospel, and suddenly, "You must give your heart to Jesus. That's something you have never done." I'd been in revival services, because Audrey was a Christian long before me. And when the appeal was made, I used to say, "I'm a Christian, I don't need the Bible." And often I used to think, "Are you really a Christian?" Yeah, so I knelt down by a toolbox.
Wow.
And gave my heart to the Lord. Heaven opened up. And yet, strange thing was, that's when the devil got me in his sights. The devil leaves you alone until he feels he's going to lose you. And for quite a while after that. I had great doubts about even the existence of God. But it was because I was only then really beginning to think about my faith and trying to put it together.
Yeah.
But
you said that heaven opened up. What happened?
Well, just you feel a load. Load has been lifted. Burdens are lifted at Calvary. And I was walking on air, sort of praying all day, and then the doubts began to come in. It's partly because I used to go to the chapel in Salcombe on Sundays. I always gone to chapel, even before I was converted. I remember when I was stationed for a while up in Lincolnshire, and I walked all the way from my radar station there to Louth, which was 5 miles, just to go to the evening service, and 5 miles back. So I kept up all the show of a Christian. This is why we were saying today, people can be Christians outwardly without being Christians inwardly. Yes, and then of course I immediately went to the minister in Salcombe, Reverend Gordon Moody, and told him what had happened. And he threw me in at the deep end. Come with me next Sunday, he said, give your testimony. Well, I'm glad he did. And so I went with him that next Sunday to Hope Cove, and I gave my testimony.
What an appropriate name.
Hope Cove, yeah. Hope Cove. Yeah, she's still there. Yeah. And of course there were fishermen there in the service, and after the service, one of the fishermen came up to me and said, that was wonderful. You take this, and he had a bag, and in the bag was a crab.
That was your first payment?
That was my first payment. Well, I don't like crab anyway. Do you know what I did with that crab?
What?
Some of my friends were out late that night. I put it in one of their beds. So even though I was converted, I hadn't lost my sense of humour.
Oh, brilliant.
And when he came in about 1 o'clock in the morning, ah! Yeah, perhaps our grandchildren ought to know some of these things. Yeah. No, Father was. When I came home and said I was. But of course, the call came to me while I was in the Royal Air Force, and that's another story too. There was at Salcombe. There was a young fellow at the church there who had been training as a lawyer, but he gave up the law because he felt called to the ministry. And he met me one day, and he said, what are you going to do when you leave the Royal Air Force? And I said, I'm not sure. I said, I thought about going into teaching. And he knew, of course, that I had been given my testimony. Well, you ought to go into the ministry, he said. I thought of all my excuses. And I said, well, I don't know enough about the Bible. Well, you learn that at college. And I said, I'm too shy. I can't speak. Remember Moses? Well, you'll soon get over that, he said. And after I left him, I walked up and down the shore of the estuary, and I couldn't get this out of my mind. You should go into the ministry. And of course I was fighting with all these excuses. But in the end, I just knew that it was the voice of God through this young fellow. Yes, well, when I was demobbed, and of course thinking about employment, and I had to 2 years before 12 months before I could go to college, because I had to get 2 years, that's right. I had 12 months to do my local preacher's studies and qualify, then another 12 months in which I was doing all the interviews for candidating for the ministry. So I had 2 years in which I had to find employment. And I told my father I was going in the ministry, and he was very, very cross. Of course, he was disappointed really, because he and mother had sacrificed to keep me in school. I was a bit brighter than my brothers. I was kept on in the sixth form, and they thought that I would get a good job. And he even went to a relative of ours who was secretary to the manager of the ICI factory down in Tuckamore. ICI factory used to make explosives for the mines then, the tin mines. And it took him a lot because he didn't get on very well with this auntie. It was a distant auntie of mine. But he went and he swallowed his pride and got her to ask for me to have a job. And when he'd done this, he said, "Oh, I've got a job for you." He said, "They'll take you on at the ICI. You'll be made for life." The devil really put me on the spot. Well, I didn't want to go in the ICI. But Father, I can't. God has called me into the ministry. "Then you're a fool." Fool. He was very cross with me. But when I went after I'd been in college and went out to Wales, he visited one day. Actually, he came up to see a football match at Cardiff. But he came up to see me as well. And he stayed with a Mrs. Williams. And Mrs. Williams afterwards said, "Your father told me that he understands now." He never told me that.
He never told you?
No. "Your father said he understands now what it meant."
Wow.
So he was reconciled, and he died soon after. Kidney failure.
Isn't God good to let you know?
Father died at 59. Yeah.
Oh.